What's up, guys? I wanted to go ahead and do a part 2 on why feminism is systematically destroying our amazing country. So, one of the things that I've been seeing, I wanted to talk about this yesterday, or when I did part 1, but I'm going to try to keep these videos under 10 minutes. It's just easier to listen to. So, I hear feminists talk all the time that we live in this tyrannical patriarchy system, and this is just factually false. It's not true. And I think that they need to either open a book or travel to parts of the world that actually have tyranny and violent oppression. Tyrannical patriarchy, which this is this narrative that they're living under, would not allow you to drive a Tesla and parade around in Starbucks and on Instagram and freely doing whatever it is that you want to do. It's amazing that we live in the most successful, wealthy, and affluent civilization this world has ever seen. Yet, if it's true what they say, that we live in a tyrannical patriarchy, or we're dictated by a tyrannical patriarchy, that means that our success has been derived from this male-dominated tyrannical patriarchy of a government system. And this is wildly inconsistent, and it completely contradicts their very core belief, because tyrannical governments don't produce affluence and wealth. It's not a sustainable life. It doesn't create high standards of living. It creates poverty, it creates famine, it creates violence and murder and rape, and generally the result of that is human genocide. It's usually mass death and you can look around the world and see that where tyranny has existed, violence and mass death of innocent people have generally occurred. And this is poverty-stricken Venezuela, an actual oppressive, tyrannical regime where people are literally eating zoo animals just to survive. Also a country that only 2 years ago the Democrats said that the United States should model their economic and socialist policies. How'd that work out? And so so if anybody ever asks you again, or if you ever have to debate a feminist, just bring that up, because that's what they say, that we live in a tyrannical patriarchy where it's male-dominated. But it's only male-dominated when you ask them, what's dominated by men? And they always say the same thing, that some of the most successful people in the world are men, right? So they take a very small fraction of the population, less than 1%, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of 1%, that are hyper-successful, and they use that to blanket the entire system and say that the entire system is like some of these hyper-successful men. This is absurd. But they don't talk about the other statistics that men lead in, the other categories that men are, much more successful than women at, like suicide rates, drug addiction, imprisonment. Men get their kids taken away more during custody battles. More men die in war. More men are victims of domestic violence. More men are victims of violent crimes. More men commit suicides and are on drugs. You don't hear those statistics. They only want to use the statistics that allow them to, indoctrinate young, impressionable women into scaring them into believing that they are controlled by these rich, masculine men that are overly masculated, and they need some of their testosterone taken away. And that's how they indoctrinate these young, impressionable people, certainly across college campuses. Because if they laid out all the facts and said, okay, some of the richest people in the world are men, but men also lead in suicides and all of these other categories, violent crimes, they're victims far more often than women are, they're graduating college far less than women are, then it wouldn't be as scary. They wouldn't be able to get as many people to come on board. So they only use, it's sort of hypocrisy at its finest. It's selective hypocrisy, They don't really lay the facts out. They pick one very small, minute detail, and that's what they extrapolate all of their information from for their indoctrination, into these young, impressionable, women. And I just think it's funny, and what it is actually is, honestly, it's incredibly disrespectful, and it's foolish to believe that we live in this tyrannical and oppressive government, and it's disrespectful to the men, women, and children who actually live or have lived through tyrannical governments and tyrannical patriarchies and violent oppression. And one thing that's really disgusting, excuse me, one thing that's really disgusting is that by saying that we live in this tyrannical patriarchy cheapens the oppression and the tyranny that we've seen around the world. It cheapens it because most of these young people are not very well adept on world history and things that have happened in other countries. They're boxed off in the United States. We're fortunate. We're lucky in Western civilization that we haven't had to go through what Venezuela's going through. We haven't had to go through what the USSR went through. We haven't had to go through what North Korea is going through right now. We're very lucky and we're very fortunate. And many of the feminists take that for granted because they don't know what it's like in another country. So they assume that they're just so oppressed here because, I don't know, maybe because they have a liberal arts degree and they're not making millions of dollars a year like Jeff Bezos did by taking risks and making investments and creating thousands of jobs across the world. Like they just think that if you're a man that you don't deserve to be successful, and maybe it's not because he was a man. Maybe it was because he was competent and self-determined and self-driven and wasn't in part, of this cult-like man-hating culture that is derived from feminism. And he went out and he created something that brought value to the market. That has nothing to do with his gender and everything to do with his competence. And that's what's wrong with our culture today is they're so quick to identify people of success as only being successful because they're white or they're male instead of they're competent and they're educated. And it actually ironically derives from incompetence from them, from the left, from the feminists. And, I'm not saying that there's not forms of patriarchy in our system because there certainly are. I mean, But it's not tyrannical patriarchy. Tyranny literally means evil. So to say that we have all of our success because of evil is it's not consistent, and it's wildly contradictive, and they are mutually exclusive. So that's a big crack in their philosophy. So if you're ever in an argument with a feminist, just bring that up. Because I'm sure you're going to hear that we live in a male-dominated patriarchy. Really? Then why are you so successful? Why are the poorest people in our civilization still in the top 1% of all civilization of all time? If this is such a male tyranny, patriarchy society that we live in, then just ask them that and see what they say. I don't think they really understand what tyranny is. I mean, I could give you examples. If this was, a tyrannical government, right? If you needed a plumber, for example, you don't have a band of tyrannical plumbers forcing you into services or else you face violent, consequential actions, right? That's tyranny. Now, we live in a free market society that's not dictated by patriarchy power, but patriarchy competence. Because if we were under patriarchy power, then the system would fail. I mean, the system would fail. Our patriarchy isn't, it's constructed of competence, which is why we built a free market system, a system that has never existed before in all of civilization. And that's why it works so well. Because if you want a plumber or a roofer or an electrician, then you have thousands of options, no matter what city that you live in, and you're able to do your due diligence on every one of these people. You're not forced into coercion. You have you have the free market. You have free will, an economical free will to make free decisions based on your due diligence and what's going to bring you the most value at the best price. That is not tyranny. And if you think that, you are foolish. You are foolish to think that. And another thing that I wanted to touch on is this false hoax thing that I briefly talked about in part 1. This is pissing me off. And this comes from a weak culture. And I mean what I say when I say women. Modern day feminists are oppressing women, not men. Modern day feminists are creating an oppression among young, impressionable women. And the reason that is because they're not empowering women. They're not encouraging women to be self-determined and independent free thinkers. They are creating scare tactics to entice women into a culture of victimhood, where victimhood is rewarded, where fake crimes and false rape accusations and false hate crimes and false political hate crimes are all rewarded for the bigger picture, which is political propaganda against the Republican Party. That's why you saw the Muslim woman in New York City that I briefly talked about in part 1, who just pled guilty for filing false accusations against, again, here's the narrative, not just men, but white men, and white men wearing MAGA hats. Because apparently this is the narrative that they follow, and this is just a filthy slander against the good American people who are Trump supporters. It's amazing. You see all these hoax crimes, one after another, rape accusation, the Jussie Smollett thing, and it's all constructed by the filthy left. You don't see Republicans marching down the street with pink pussy hats or dick hats talking about how they want something that somebody else has or how they feel oppressed. No, they go out, they want it, they work for it. And that's the difference. It's not conducive to a successful life to perpetuate this self-victimhood, this self-victim mentality. That's not conducive to a successful life. And that's what you see with the Muslim woman who just pled guilty, who's now going to go to prison. That's what you see with Jussie Smollett, who's willing to put innocent men in prison for a political agenda, for political propaganda, for political warfare on Republicans. That's what he's willing to go to. And why on earth has Ilhan Omar still not been persecuted for her filthy slanders against the Jewish people and essentially delegitimizing Israel as a country? She made a pathetic apology that we all know meant nothing. It had zero merit and zero substance, and she is still allowed to sit on the foreign affair committees. But the people that questioned her, the independent journalists that questioned her anti-Semitic remarks, are now banned and suspended from all forms of social media. But the woman who actually commits the act of anti-Semitic remarks is not only not suspended, not persecuted, but she gets voted into congressional office. Boy, diversity is great, isn't it? And this is what happens when victimhood is rewarded, is you're not allowed to objectively question filthy, bad ideas without being vilified or persecuted yourself. And those are the very fundamental reasons that made our country the greatest civilization that this world has ever seen, is we can objectively question bad ideas, bad people, bad administrations, and we do it in the name of free speech and free thought to progressively put our society and our culture in better positions, to ultimately put our country in a better position. And that's what's being taken away from us now. That is exactly what's being taken away from us now. We see inherent discrimination against men and in particular white men, and white Republican women are also getting it as well. It's just wild discrimination and sexism against white Republican women or white Republican men. And this is just, it's toxic to our society. It's toxic to our culture. This kind of nonsense has to be stopped. It has to be socially condemned. Another thing, a quick point I wanted to make. I've gone a few minutes over here, but hopefully you don't mind. One of the reasons I don't like this, and you're seeing it now on college campuses, because they perpetuated this idea of this rape culture, which is just wildly inaccurate. They tried to say that if you're going on a college campus, for example, in California, that the chances of you being raped are essentially like the Congo in Africa. That's how they're scaring women, in the United States. But what it does is or the direction that college campuses are going now is that they've created a culture that they want you to automatically believe the victim. So due process and innocent until proven guilty, which is what made this country one of its founding principles, is slowly fading away due to a lot of feminist pressure. And this sense of that you have to automatically believe the victim is foolish. And what it does is it's going to lead to wild manipulation of the system, which is exactly what you're already seeing with the Muslim woman in the subway in New York City, with the Jussie Smollett, with the Covington boy situation. He was automatically guilty until he was able to prove himself innocent, until a judge declared him that there was no ill harm done by him, and now he's ultimately suing the Washington Post for $250 million, and rightfully so. But this is what happens when you reward victimhood and you promote victimhood, and due process is taken away, where innocent men are automatically proven guilty. Not innocent until guilty. You are guilty, and now you have to prove yourself innocent. This is a wild violation of our civil rights and liberties that we have in this country, and that's the direction that we're going if we don't condemn this socially, and if we don't stop this. To automatically believe a victim without due process is foolish. It is foolish. And as we are starting to see, it's going to lead to wild manipulation, because people are going to abuse that. They're going to make wild accusations to get sympathy, to get rewarded, to get recognition and notoriety. And who gives a fuck what happens to the men and the life that you just ruined? Who gives a fuck if he loses scholarship? Who gives a fuck if he's called a racist for the rest of his life? Or a rapist. He's identified as a rapist, because we know that's what happens. No, who gives a fuck about him? Let's just continue to promote the victimhood. That's weakening our culture, and it's weakening women, and it's promoted and encouraged by the feminists. You're not empowering women. Empowering women would be liberating women, allowing them to have freedom to pursue their self-fulfilling goals, both professionally and personally, whatever that may be. To be able to objectively think, to be able to think independently, to be successful independently. That's what creates freedom and liberation. Not scare tactics into thinking that they need to be part of a cult, or else they're going to be vilified and oppressed. That creates weakness. It creates, it creates and enables women to be sort of self-victims. And instead of victors, it creates victims. And, victims don't get rewarded in the world for being weak. Historically speaking, victims are rewarded for being strong and conquering their fears and overcoming obstacles, both men and women. Overcoming fears and obstacles, no matter how big they are. That's what's rewarded. Not indoctrinating women into believing that they're inferior. That's fucking disgusting. So let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to continue to do. If you have any other video ideas, let me know what you think in terms of some of these social justice, ideas, feminism. I'm gonna start touching on some socialism and some different topics that hopefully encourage dialogue and that you guys want to listen to. So let me know what you think. We'll see you guys. Appreciate it.